Long ago, along a quiet stretch of coastline where the sea breathed endlessly against the rocks, there lived a young man named Elias. He was 27 years old, strong in body, curious in spirit, but perpetually restless in mind. Though his village by the ocean seemed peaceful to outsiders, waves lapping at the shore, gulls circling above, the air salted with the scent of the tide inside. Elias, there was no peace at all. Every day he was consumed by thought. His mind replayed the mistakes of his past as if they were fresh wounds. At night, when the village slept, his fears about the future returned with even greater force, whispering doubts about whether he would ever find meaning or stability. His thoughts clashed and collided like storm-driven waves, leaving him exhausted, sleepless, and heavy with worry. Often he would wander the beach alone under the pale glow of the moon. He would watch its reflection tremble on the surface of the water and wonder why he could not feel the same stillness. "Why can't I quiet my mind, even for a single moment?" he asked himself. One evening, while sitting on a rocky outcrop, Elias overheard older fishermen speaking about a hermit who lived on the hill overlooking the sea. They called him the Keeper of the Lamp. Years ago, they said, he had been a renowned professor of philosophy in the city. After decades of guiding students and debating the mysteries of life, he had abandoned the noise of urban life to live in simplicity near the ocean. Every night, villagers said, his home glowed with the steady flame of an oil lamp, shining like a small lighthouse in the dark. Those burdened by confusion or sorrow sometimes climbed to the hill to seek his counsel, and many claimed they had left with lighter hearts. The story stirred something in Elias, he thought. Perhaps this man can teach me what I can not teach myself, how to quiet the endless storm of thought. Without delay, Elias prepared a small pack with bread, dried fish, and a flask of water, then set out toward the hill where the Keeper of the Lamp was said to dwell. The path was not long, but it tested him. First came stretches of loose sand where the sea winds blew grit into his eyes. Then came narrow ledges of rock, slick with spray from the crashing waves below. The sound of the ocean roared at his feet, reminding him with each step of how fragile he was against nature's force. Yet the hope of peace pushed him onward. At last, after hours of climbing, Elias reached the crest of the hill. There he saw a modest wooden house draped in ivy and wildflowers. On the porch sat an old man with hair silver as the moon. In front of him burned an oil lamp, its flame steady despite the evening breeze. His eyes were half closed, as if he were listening not with his ears but with his soul to the hush of wind, the rhythm of the tide, the silence beneath all sound. Elias approached, bowed slightly, and spoke with trembling voice. "Sir, I come to you with a restless mind. My thoughts never stop. I cannot escape my past, nor can I stop fearing the future. Please, teach me how to find peace." The old man slowly opened his eyes. They were calm, as deep and steady as the sea itself. A faint smile touched his lips. "If you truly wish to find peace," he said, "I will give you a task. It will seem simple, yet it may teach you more than words ever could." Rising, the old man disappeared into his home. When he returned, he carried a lamp filled to the brim with oil. He handed it carefully to Elias. "Take this lamp," he instructed. "Walk down to the fish market by the shore and return here. But remember, do not let the flame go out, and do not spill a single drop of oil." Elias stared at the lamp, astonished. The path was steep, the winds strong, and the market was known for its clamor, the cries of merchants, the clashing of knives, the screeching of gulls overhead. Yet his hunger for wisdom was greater than his doubt. With a solemn nod, he accepted the challenge. He descended the hill cautiously, both hands cradling the lamp. The sea breeze whipped around him, carrying the brine of the ocean. Down at the market, the air was thick with noise, vendors shouting prices, cleavers striking wooden blocks, gulls shrieking as they dived for scraps. Yet Elias did not allow his gaze to wander. Every ounce of his attention clung to the flame. His breath slowed, his steps measured, his world reduced to the fragile light and the trembling oil. By the time he returned to the old man's porch, sweat covered his brow, but the flame still burned, steady and bright. Elias's voice carried pride as he said, "Sir, I succeeded. The lamp has not gone out, and not a single drop has spilled." The old man nodded approvingly, then asked gently, "Very well. But tell me, on your journey, did you hear the crash of the waves against the rocks? Did you notice the gulls wheeling in the sky? Did you smell the sharp salt of fish in the market air?" Elias faltered. "No," he admitted. "I noticed none of it. I saw nothing. I heard nothing. I thought only of the lamp." The old man's smile deepened, though his eyes remained thoughtful. He laid a hand on Elias' shoulder and said softly, "You have learned something tonight, though perhaps you do not yet see what it is. Rest here, and tomorrow I will show you more." Confused but curious, Elias agreed to stay. That night, for the first time in many months, he felt the stirrings of calm. As he lay in the small guest room of the wooden house, listening to the distant surf and watching the lamplight flicker across the walls, Elias drifted into a sleep that felt different, lighter, freer, as if his burdens had loosened their grip. The following morning, Elias awoke to the sound of wind brushing through the ivy that wrapped around the wooden house. Sunlight streamed through the shutters in golden streaks, illuminating dust motes that danced lazily in the air. For a brief moment he lay still and realized he had slept more deeply than he had in years. There was a lightness within him, fragile but undeniable, as though his mind had been unburdened during the night. Stepping outside, Elias found the old man already seated on the porch, the familiar oil lamp glowing faintly beside him despite the daylight. The old man's gaze rested on the horizon where the sea met the sky, as though he were conversing with a line where worlds touched. "Good morning," Elias said, bowing respectfully. The old man nodded. "Good morning, Elias. Tell me, how did you sleep?" "Peacefully," Elias admitted. "For the first time in many months." The old man's eyes glimmered with quiet understanding. "Peace visited you because your mind, for a while, was not chasing the past or wrestling with the future. Last night you were content simply to rest." Elias reflected on this but said nothing. The old man rose slowly and handed Elias a small loaf of bread and water. After they ate in silence, he spoke again. "Today you will repeat the task, but this time, I ask you to carry the lamp to the harbor, not merely to the market. The harbor is louder, busier, full of ships returning and departing. Keep the flame alive, and return without spilling a drop of oil." Elias hesitated. The harbor was chaotic at dawn, when fishermen shouted across the waves, when ropes slapped against wooden piers, and when the cries of sailors mingled with the briny stench of nets heavy with catch. Yet he had succeeded once before, and pride gave him confidence. "I will do as you say," Elias replied, taking the lamp carefully into his hands. The descent felt familiar. The rocky path, the rushing wind, the salt spray, but his attention was consumed once again by the flickering flame. The harbor below was alive with commotion. Men hauled nets glistening with silver fish, gulls squawked and dove, ropes creaked as ships swayed. Voices clashed in bargaining, laughter and curses. Yet Elias noticed none of it. He placed each step as though walking on fragile glass, eyes fixed on the lamp. At last he returned to the hill, weary but victorious. He held out the lamp with steady hands. "Master, I have succeeded again." The flame did not falter and the oil remains as it was. The old man studied him quietly, then asked the same question as before. "Tell me, Elias, did you see the sails returning from the horizon, filled like the bellies of whales? Did you hear the songs the sailors sang to steady their rowing? Did you notice the sun scattering diamonds across the surface of the sea?" Elias blinked, his brow furrowed. "No, I saw nothing. I heard nothing. I watched only the lamp." The old man sighed gently, not in disappointment but in patience. "Then you walked through a world overflowing with life, yet it was as though you were blind and deaf. You succeeded in the task, but you missed the harbor itself." Elias shifted uneasily. For the first time, doubt pierced his pride. The old man continued. "Yesterday you learned focus. Today you repeated it. But focus alone can become another prison. If your mind clings only to one thing, it shuts out the richness of life. Balance is the lesson yet to come." That evening, the two of them sat together watching the sun sink into the sea. The sky burned with colors amber, crimson, violet spreading like spilled paint. Elias felt a stirring in his chest, something between awe and longing. The old man noticed his expression and said softly, "You feel it, don't you? The beauty of what you nearly missed today. Life speaks through moments like this, but we only hear it if our minds are open. You see, Elias, there are two kinds of silence. One is the silence of force, when you narrow your mind so tightly that all else disappears. The other is the silence of presence, when you rest so fully in the moment that you need not push anything away. The second is the silence that leads to peace." Elias let the words settle. They felt both mysterious and undeniable. That night he dreamed of the lamp. In his dream he carried it through endless places, markets, forests, deserts, never spilling a drop, never looking away. Yet in the dream his face was solemn, his eyes unseeing, his ears unhearing. The lamp's light consumed him, and the world blurred into darkness. He awoke with a start, his heart pounding. For the first time, he wondered whether his success in the old man's tests had truly been a success at all. The next morning, Elias asked eagerly, "What is the next task?" "I want to learn what I have not yet seen." The old man's eyes twinkled with quiet amusement. "Impatience, too, is a thought that robs peace, but very well. Today you will take the lamp once more. Only this time, I do not forbid you to look or listen. Carry it through the harbor again. Keep the flame alive, but also keep your eyes open. Hear what there is to hear. Smell the salt, the tar, the fish, the sweat. Let the world enter you even as you guard the flame." Elias frowned. "But if I divide my attention, will I not fail?" The old man smiled gently. "That is the lesson." So Elias set out once more, the lamp cradled carefully. At first, fear consumed him, fear that the wind would snuff the flame, fear that oil would spill. But gradually he remembered the old man's words. He lifted his eyes. He saw sails swelling like the chests of giants, gulls darting and tumbling in playful arcs. He smelled the harbor briny, pungent, raw with life. He heard laughter, curses, bargaining, even a sailor's crude song echoing across the docks. And all the while, the flame still burned in his hands. When he returned to the porch, he was smiling. The lamp was safe, but his heart was full of something greater than pride. The old man looked at him knowingly. "So, Elias, what did you learn today?" Elias paused, searching for words. "I learned that I can guard the flame without closing my eyes to the world. That I can walk carefully and still hear the gulls, see the sails, smell the salt. For the first time, I felt as though I was truly there, not only guarding the lamp, but also living the walk." The old man nodded slowly, as though satisfied with the long-awaited answer. "Yes, you learned presence. To hold your focus and yet remain open. To be mindful, but not narrow. That is the beginning of true peace." Elias bowed his head, humbled. For the first time, the lesson began to take root in his heart. And so, under the vast evening sky, with the oil lamp flickering between them, master and student sat in silence, not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of fullness. Days passed on the hill, and Elias remained with the old man. Each morning began the same, the soft cry of gulls wheeling over the sea, the steady flame of the oil lamp, and the scent of salt carried upward by the breeze. Yet inside, Elias felt that each day was different, as though every dawn revealed some new layer of himself that he had not known before. The tasks with the lamp had stirred something profound in him. He began to realize that peace was not something to be found like a hidden coin buried in the sand, but something to be lived moment by moment. Still, he felt there was more to learn, for his heart remained unsettled in places he could not name. One evening, as the sun melted into the sea, Elias finally asked, "Master, I have learned to focus, and I have learned to remain present. But the storms inside me still return. At night, I still hear the voices of my past, reminding me of my mistakes, and during the day, fears about the future creep in. How do I silence those voices? How do I keep the future from frightening me?" The old man studied him for a long moment. His eyes were calm, but within them flickered the hint of a smile, as though he had been waiting for this question. "Elias," he said softly, "tonight I will show you another lesson, but it will not be with a lamp." He gestured for Elias to follow him. They walked down a narrow path that wound behind the cottage, through tall grasses that swayed in the twilight breeze. Soon they reached a small clearing, where a large clay bowl stood on the ground, filled to the brim with water drawn from a nearby spring. The surface reflected the last colors of sunset orange-violet and deepening blue. "Look into this water," the old man said. "Tell me what you see." Elias leaned over the bowl. His reflection wavered on the surface, blurred by the faint tremble of the breeze. "I see myself," he replied. The old man nodded. "Now," he continued, handing Elias a small stone, "drop this into the bowl." Elias obeyed. The stone fell with a soft plunk, and ripples spread across the water. His reflection shattered into fragments. "What do you see now?" the old man asked. "My face is broken. I cannot see myself clearly." "Exactly," the old man said. "The stone is like a thought, a memory, a worry, a fear. Each thought stirs the mind, distorts its stillness, and breaks the reflection of who you are. As long as you keep throwing stones, the water will never rest, and you will never see yourself clearly." Elias frowned, his heart heavy. "But thoughts come whether I want them to or not. I cannot stop them." The old man smiled gently. "No, you cannot stop the stones from existing, but you can choose whether or not to throw them. And even when a stone falls, if you do not stir the water further, the ripples will fade, and the surface will grow calm again. Peace does not come from silencing the world, Elias. It comes from allowing the ripples to settle on their own." They stood together in silence, watching the ripples smooth into stillness until the reflection returned, clear and whole once more. That night, Elias pondered the lesson. He remembered how often he had stirred his own water, replaying old regrets, rehearsing future disasters, clinging to each thought as though it were truth. He realized he had been throwing stones into his own mind, endlessly, not knowing he could simply let them sink and vanish. The next morning, the old man gave him a new task. This time, it did not involve walking with a lamp or guarding oil. Instead, he handed Elias a wooden bucket. "Go to the spring in the forest," he instructed. "Fill this bucket with water, and return here. But along the way, notice everything you can. The path, the trees, the sounds, the scents. Do not hurry. Do not rush. Let the journey itself be your task." Elias was puzzled. This seemed too simple, but he bowed and set off. The path wound through tall pines, their needles whispering like secrets in the wind. He noticed how the light filtered through the branches, painting shifting patterns on the ground. He heard the chatter of unseen birds, the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush. He smelled the earth, damp and rich with life. For the first time in years, Elias felt he was truly walking, not racing toward an imagined future. Not dragging the weight of the past, but simply walking. When he reached the spring, he knelt and filled the bucket. He watched the water swirl, clear and cold, catching flashes of light like glass. For a long while, he just listened to the trickle of the spring and felt the cool air on his skin. When he returned to the cottage, the old man looked at him quietly and asked, "Tell me about your journey." Elias began to speak, describing the whispering pines, the dancing light, the birdsong, the earthy fragrance of the soil. His words spilled out with unexpected eagerness, as though he had been starved of such noticing all his life. The old man smiled. "And what of the bucket?" Did you spill the water? Elias looked down at the bucket in surprise. The water was still full. I didn't even think of spilling it, he admitted. Exactly, the old man said. When you walk in presence, without clinging or fearing, balance arises naturally. You no longer guard the bucket in fear, yet it remains safe. Just as peace will remain within you, even as the world continues to move. Elias bowed his head, humbled again. He felt as though another layer of fog had lifted from his mind. That night, as they sat by the lamplight, Elias asked, "Master, does this mean I should never think of the past or the future?" The old man shook his head. "No, the past teaches, and the future guides. But when the past becomes chains, or the future becomes storms, you are no longer living, you are drowning. Learn to visit them without living inside them. Learn to return always to the present, for only here can peace be found." Elias listened intently, the words carving themselves into his heart like lines in stone. The sea wind rose outside, carrying the cries of gulls and the rhythm of waves against the rocks. Elias felt the sounds in a new way, not as distractions, not as noise, but as life itself. And for the first time, he thought, perhaps peace is not something to be reached at the end of a road, but something waiting in every step, if only I have the courage to see it. The nights on the hill grew cooler. The autumn winds carried with them a sharpness that seemed to cleanse the air. Elias often lay awake, listening to the restless song of the sea, feeling both small and strangely infinite beneath the stars. His lessons with the old man had opened doors within him that he never knew existed, yet those very doors led into corridors filled with shadows he had not yet faced. One evening, as they shared a simple meal of bread and herbs, Elias finally voiced the unease that lingered in him. "Master," he said, "I understand now that peace can be found in presence, that thoughts are like stones in water, and that balance arises when I walk with awareness. But still, something clings to me. Memories of my failures, the mistakes I cannot forgive myself for, the people I have disappointed, they rise in me like ghosts. Even when I try to let them go, they return. What am I to do with the weight of my own heart?" The old man chewed thoughtfully, then set down his bread. His face was calm, but his eyes were piercing. "You wish to let go of your past," he said softly, "but you are still clutching it, Elias. You hold it as though it were treasure, though it burns you like fire. You cannot simply wish it away. You must learn to meet it." "Meet it?" Elias frowned. "How do you mean?" The old man did not answer. Instead, he rose and gestured for Elias to follow. They walked down the path that led toward the cliffs overlooking the sea. The moon had risen, silvering the waves, which surged and broke against the rocks far below. The air was cold and smelled of salt and stone. There, on a flat stretch of rock, lay a bundle wrapped in cloth. The old man unwrapped it, revealing a heavy sack filled with smooth black stones. He placed it before Elias. "Tonight," he said, "you will carry this sack down to the shoreline and back again. Each stone represents a memory, a wound, or a fear that you carry. Do not drop them, and do not hurry. Walk with them, feel their weight, and bring them back here." Elias bent to lift the sack. It was heavier than he expected, pressing into his shoulders with the weight of years. He staggered at first, but steadied himself and began to walk down the winding path toward the beach. The stones clinked dully against each other, echoing in the quiet night. At first he thought only of the pain in his back, the strain in his legs. But as he walked, the old man's words grew inside him. Each stone is a memory, a wound, or a fear. He began to think of his childhood, of the days when he had spoken harsh words to his father, words he regretted but could never take back. He thought of the love he had lost because he was too afraid to be vulnerable. He thought of the mistakes at work, the opportunities wasted, the friends he had neglected. Each thought seemed to rise in rhythm with the ache of the sack. By the time he reached the shoreline, his legs trembled. He dropped to his knees in the sand, the weight of the sack pressing him down. For a moment, he wanted nothing more than to cast the stones into the sea and be rid of them. But he remembered the old man's instruction: bring them back. So he sat by the waves, breathing heavily, listening to the crash and pull of the tide. And in that sound he heard something new, not condemnation, not judgment, but the voice of time itself. Infinite and unyielding, the sea did not care about his mistakes. The sea had seen countless lives, countless errors, countless griefs, and yet it continued to move, always returning, always renewing. When his strength returned, Elias lifted the sack once more and began the long climb back. Each step was agony, but with each step he also began to notice something. Though the stones were heavy, they were only stones. They had no life except the meaning he gave them. At last he reached the flat rock where the old man waited. Exhausted, Elias dropped the sack at his feet. What the old man asked. It was unbearable, Elias said between breaths. Every step reminded me of all I regret, all I fear. I wanted to throw them into the sea. And why did you not? Because you told me not to. The old man smiled faintly. Good, now look inside. Confused, Elias opened the sack. To his astonishment, half the stones had vanished. The sack was lighter, far lighter than before. What is this? He gasped. The old man's eyes glimmered in the moonlight. When you carry your pain willingly, when you face it rather than flee, it begins to dissolve. The act of bearing it consciously is itself a release. Every step you took down that path was a step toward forgiveness of yourself and of the world. That is why the weight has lessened. Elias stared into the sack, his heart pounding. He felt tears on his cheeks, though he had not known he was crying. "Master," he whispered, "will the sack ever be empty?" The old man laid a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Perhaps, perhaps not. But it does not need to be empty for you to walk freely. What matters is that you no longer mistake the stones for who you are. They are part of your story, yes, but they are not your essence. You are not your regrets. You are not your fears. You are the one who carries them and the one who can put them down." The wind swept across the cliff, carrying the scent of the sea. Elias closed his eyes, letting the words sink into him like water into parched soil. For the first time, he felt a deep shift inside, not the absence of pain, but the presence of acceptance. That night, as he lay on his mat in the cottage, he thought of the sack of stones. It still waited outside, half full. Yet instead of dread, he felt something like gratitude. For the first time, he understood. Peace was not about erasing his past, but about learning to walk with it lightly. And as he drifted into sleep, the rhythm of the waves outside no longer sounded like a storm. It sounded like a lullaby. The days passed, and Elias began to sense that his time on the hill was drawing to an end. There was no announcement, no command from the old man, only a quiet knowing that had settled into his chest like the slow dawning of a sunrise. The lessons had changed him, not in sudden bursts but in steady ripples, as though his entire being had been shifted by a tide. He could no longer resist. Each morning he rose before the sun, walking to the cliff edge where the horizon glowed faintly pink. He would stand there, breathing in the salt air, listening to the ceaseless movement of the sea, and in that rhythm he felt a reflection of himself, an endless cycle of rise and fall, giving and receiving, release and renewal. One morning the old man joined him on the cliff. He stood silently for a long time, his gaze fixed upon the waves. When he finally spoke, his voice was almost a whisper, as though it belonged to the wind. "You are ready, Elias." Elias turned to him, startled. "Ready? For what?" "To go back," the old man said simply. "The hill is not your home. It is only a place of learning. You must carry what you have discovered here into the world below. The true test of wisdom is not in solitude, but in life among people, among noise, among temptation and sorrow. That is where peace is needed most." Elias felt a pang in his heart. The thought of leaving the quiet cottage, the lessons, the stillness of the hillet frightened him. "But what if I lose it?" he confessed. "What if the noise consumes me again, and I forget all that I have learned?" The old man smiled, the kind of smile that seemed carved by centuries. "You will forget, from time to time. That is the way of all human beings. But forgetting is not failure. It is only a reminder to begin again. Peace is not something you hold once and forever. It is something you return to as one returns to breath. Do not fear the forgetting. Fear only the refusal to remember." The words pierced Elias deeply. He nodded, though his eyes were moist. "I don't know how to thank you." "There is no need," the old man replied. "The sea does not thank the river for flowing into it. It is enough that you carry this water forward into the world." That afternoon Elias prepared to leave. His belongings were few: a satchel with some food, a small blanket, and the half-empty sack of stones that still rested by the cottage door. He hesitated, wondering whether to take it with him. Seeing his indecision, the old man said, "Leave it, if you wish, or carry it. The choice is yours." Elias looked down at the sack. He thought of the night he had carried it to the shore, how it had weighed upon him like the sum of all his regrets. And he thought of how light it had felt when he brought it back. Half the stones vanished, as though the sea itself had swallowed some of his pain. Smiling faintly, he bent down, picked up one smooth stone, and slipped it into his pocket. Then he left the sack behind. "Just one?" the old man asked. "Yes," Elias said, "as a reminder, not of pain, but of the path I walked." The old man nodded approvingly, and so Elias descended the hill. The path that had once seemed long and arduous now felt different. The wind on his face was not an obstacle but a companion. The noises of the village below, the gulls crying, the chatter of merchants, the distant ringing of bells no longer struck him as chaotic but as a living music, a symphony of life itself. When he reached the marketplace, people brushed past him in a hurry, voices rising, footsteps quick. Once such a place would have overwhelmed him, stirring anxiety and confusion, but now he simply breathed, letting the sounds wash over him like waves. He noticed the color of the fruits piled high, the laughter of a child tugging at her mother's hand, the rhythm of a fisherman calling out his morning catch. He felt no need to escape. The world had not changed, but he had. Days turned into weeks. Elias returned to his family, to the work he had once abandoned in despair. The challenges remained disagreements, disappointments, the unpredictability of life, but something inside him was different. When his thoughts grew tangled, he remembered the glass lamp he had once carried, steadying his attention upon its flame. When old regrets threatened to rise, he touched the stone in his pocket, reminding himself that the past was not his prison. And when the noise of the world pressed too heavily, he closed his eyes and listened for the sea within, the endless breath that flowed through all things. People around him began to notice the change. His friends said he was calmer, his siblings said he was kinder, and strangers said there was something peaceful in his eyes. Elias did not boast of his time on the hill, nor of the old man's teachings. He simply lived them, quietly and steadily, like a flame that does not call attention to itself yet offers light to all who draw near. One evening, after a long day's work, Elias sat on the shore, watching the sun sink into the horizon. The sea glowed with fire, and the gulls wheeled in the fading light. He slipped his hand into his pocket and felt the smoothness of the stone. For a long while he turned it between his fingers. And then, without hesitation, he rose and threw it into the water. The stone vanished beneath the waves with barely a splash. Elias smiled. He no longer needed it. Above him, the sky deepened into twilight, and the first stars appeared, each one shining as though it had always known the secret he had just discovered, that peace is not found in clinging, but in release. That the mind is not a vessel to be filled, but a sky to be cleared. And so Elias sat quietly by the sea, no longer seeking, no longer yearning, but simply being empty, open, and free.